ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك، لتشم تراب بلادي وترسم أحجار ومجدك.
ميل على بلدي لتشوف كيف البحر بيضحك لك، لتشم تراب بلادي ترسم أحجار ومجدك.
ميل على شاطئ حيف خدلك من رمل وتذكار، صورة بشوارع يافا وعلى صورة العكا مشوار.
ميل على شاطئ
Ala, I think that you're muted.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to our session today. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you're enjoying the rest of the program with all the interesting and amazing panels and the very inspiring sessions and speakers that we have. It's truly my pleasure to moderate this panel today, which I'm sure it will be another great panel as part of the forum. My name is Ala Tartir, and I'm the moderator of this panel today. And I'm a program and policy advisor with Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network, as well as a senior academic researcher at the Graduate Institute in Geneva and a global fellow at the Peace Research Institute, Oslo. Today, I'm very delighted to be joined by three great speakers to discuss issues related to how content management on social media platform impacts solidarity in this digital age. We have different experiences from around the globe, bringing different insights. And our speakers are Dia Kayali, Andrea Medredo, and Nadim Nashif, who I will introduce in a second. And please, this is a conversation that we all have. So please drop your questions on the chat box. And also, if you would like to switch to the Arabic translation, please switch to the translation device and translation button. So today we will discuss the policies of social media platforms and how it impacts solidarity with the Palestinians, how what is the role of digital content and online movies in spreading the Palestinian narrative and combating the Israeli efforts to create a particular stereotype about Palestinians and other groups. And also the speakers will discuss the role of activists in coordinating the efforts of exerting pressure on electronic platforms to prevent them from restricting content and spreading stereotypes about minorities and indigenous people. In other words, we're discussing the effect content moderation policies on social media have on solidarity with Palestine. How do these policies impact solidarity, and how can digital content support the Palestinian narratives? These are the main questions that we're tackling in this panel. And each speaker will talk to us and address us for around 8 minutes. And then we'll open the floor for all your questions and discussions. We will start with Dia Kayali, who is Associate Director for Advocacy at Menomec, the umbrella organization for Syrian Archive, Yemeni Archive, and Sudanese Archive. And previously, Dia worked at Witness and the Electronic Frontier Foundation and serves as on the advisory board for online censorship. And then we will move to Andrea. And Andrea is a lecturer at the School of Media and Communication at the University of Westminster in the UK and the Vice President of the International Association for Media and Communication Research. Andrea has also an extensive experience as a creative writer for political campaigns. And finally, we will end it with Nadim Nashif, who is a social entrepreneur and digital rights defender. Nadim is the founder and the executive director of Hamle, who brought all of us together here, the Arab Center for Advancement of Social Media, and a policy analyst with Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. I don't want to take more time, we have 50 minutes to engage in all these issues and all these topics that we have and we would like to cover. Just another reminder that you can ask your questions directly. So please use the chat function to raise your question, and I will make sure to ask as many as possible. With that, I would like to move to Dia to take us with their insights on all these issues and questions by focusing on your different experiences over the past years. Dia, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Hamle, for inviting me. It's always wonderful to be in a room with you. And I just want to start by saying I am dialing in from Berlin, where last week people were actually harassed by the police for wearing a keffiyeh because demonstrations in support of Palestinians were banned. And I start with that because, I think we always have to keep in mind that whatever's happening online is a clear reflection of what is happening offline. And we're seeing that with the internet as well. So to say a little bit more about the work that Mnemonic does and that I do, for the last 5 years, my work has been focused on the impact of content moderation policies on human rights related content. And when I say human rights related content, I mean direct documentation of human rights violations, all of the content related to that organizations like Syrian Archive would use to verify that documentation. And of course, documentation of protests and political speech. So people who are filming themselves to share their stories. And, we see a lot of this content get removed in the places that we work and in Palestine. And I have to say that, unfortunately, the situation on platforms for this content has continued to get worse, despite the advocacy that we've been doing, that so many people have been doing. So what we're seeing is that content gets deleted incredibly quickly and more quickly all of the time, especially outside of the United States and Western Europe. It seems to get removed mainly under graphic violence and these so-called terrorist and violent extremism policies. And I'm using quotation marks because we know that these policies themselves are very biased, as I'm going to mention. So, and I can talk about sort of how I do the advocacy, but just in these introductory comments, I'll focus on what the trends are. So, as I mentioned, using quotation marks, one of the main issues that we see, of course, is biased rules. So we see platforms have a huge reliance on US terrorist designations. And there is, of course, a lack of a unified definition of what constitutes a terrorist, what constitutes a violent extremist. And despite everything we've seen in the last several years, and actually, I do want to say, because it's been really on my mind, this wasn't something that I prepared, but over the weekend, we saw this horrible attack happen in the United States, and 10 people were killed. It was live streamed, and that content was not taken down right away. And the person who did that is not a member of a designated terrorist organization. He's not a member of any group that's on Facebook's dangerous individuals and organizations list. But he did go out and kill people, and it was politically motivated. And the content that he's posting was directly encouraging more of this. It listed specific targets. It's really disturbing content. And yet Twitter didn't even decide to take it down right away. Even though these mechanisms that are in place to get so-called terrorist and violent extremist content removed as quickly as possible, including the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, this sort of company body that works also with civil society and governments, they activated this protocol that they have as a response to attacks like this. And still, the content was not taken down immediately. And a lot of people saw his manifesto. It's a direct call for violence. So, when I talk about biased rules, it's not hypothetical. And of course, this audience knows it's not. But it's just really frustrating to see in front of your eyes that this is happening, while at the same time, we're having a crisis. With Palestinian content, it's like a wave. You might have a few weeks, maybe there's less content getting removed, and then something happens, usually Israeli aggression, and then suddenly content is getting removed at the most important time, when it's the most important to get the message out. So the hypocrisy is just incredible. So one of the issues behind that, of course, is, as I mentioned, these biased rules. A focus on US terrorist designations, which are all about non-US based organizations, as well as UN designations, which have their own issues. There's also biased moderators. That's the people who the platforms are contracting out. You know, we don't get a lot of information about who they are. We do know from, at least from some of the investigations that's been done, how quickly they have to work, how little oversight there actually is. The platforms will do sort of spot checks, but really not very much. We've also seen, particularly in Arabic-speaking countries, we see there seems to be some particular biases. So I've seen it a lot with LGBTQ-related content, and also, of course, content speaking out in support of Palestine. So they're biased, they're also underpaid, they're trying to look at too much content. Platforms also do have relationships with oppressive governments, and I'm sure Nadim will speak a little bit more about this. We know that Meta is very comfortable dealing with the Israeli government, less so with other governments in the region, although maybe Gulf countries. I mean, there's a relationship there as well that is encouraging removal of Palestinian content. We've seen this in many other places as well. India is a very disturbing example. And then the last thing is this issue of all of this feeds into why the content comes down so quickly, because there's biased machine learning processes. So what I mean by that is that it used to be, 10 years ago, content would only get taken down if somebody flagged it. So you'd have to hit the report button, whether this is on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, any platform. You actually have to report it. And since 2017, at least, platforms have been using artificial intelligence. They've been using machine learning processes to find this content. And they have all different sorts of automation. They use sort of photo DNA. They use hashes where they've previously identified content, and then they will just directly take that down or not even allow it to be uploaded. And they're going out and searching for content as well. And over the years, it's always been very, very clear that this content, these tools are tested out in Palestine. You'll hear a rumor that suddenly all posts with a certain word in them are being removed, and it's platforms say, oh no, it was a mistake, or we do this elsewhere. But it's even if it's anecdotal evidence, and again, Nadim, I'm sure will speak to, there is a lot of specific evidence, not just something that we've experienced. There's numbers to go along with this. But even when it's anecdotal, it's so much that you can't pretend that there's not something behind it. So all of these things are contributing to content getting taken down very, very quickly, getting taken down before, and in very different ways. So, I've even run tests with friends where I post something on my Instagram account, which is, I'm sure geotagged as located in Germany, and I'll post the exact same content. We did an experiment with a quote from a Palestinian activist where I posted it and it was left up. I didn't, no problem. I even asked my friends, comment if you see this. And then in other places, that content in Palestine, if somebody who's geolocated in Palestine or mainly posts in Arabic, then they post it and the content gets taken down. So the bias is really quite clear. I think instead of going into how I do advocacy, because I really want time for questions, I'll leave that, but I can get to it next, and really excited to hear from the other speakers.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dea, for all these insights. I do have a couple of questions, but I will not ask now, including like issues. How do you do the advocacy on these issues and others? But thanks for sticking to the time. I would like now to move to Andrea, and Andrea will take us to other parts of the world. We'll move with Andrea to Brazil and see what lessons we can learn from there, and what issues we'd like to highlight. So, Andrea, the screen is yours for the next 8 minutes or so.
Thank you so much. Good evening, good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm Andrea Medrado. I'm a lecturer research at the University of Westminster in London. I wanted to share a presentation. Okay, here it is. Yeah, can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Yes, I am moving to Brazil, and I am going to speak about YouTube's mediation of political communication in the Brazilian context. And these are some of the points that emerged from a study that I conducted when I was based at the Federal Fluminense University in Brazil with two colleagues, Simone Duvalli and Adilson Cabral. And we had some questions as our starting points, because a lot has been said about social media platforms, allowing activists, for example, to reach wider audiences. But what happens, when these platforms, which are commercial, profit-driven, start acting as the mediators of the content that's shared, for example, by social movements or progressive parties? What kind of related content does a platform like YouTube, for example, suggest to viewers who are searching for videos? So specifically, we analyzed the networks of recommended videos for two social movements and a political party. So MTST is the Portuguese acronym for the Homeless Workers who live in urban areas of Brazil movement. APIB is the Portuguese acronym for the Association of Indigenous People of Brazil. And the PSOL party is a small left-wing progressive party. And we analyzed the sort of networks of recommended videos for these three actors in the context of the 2018 elections in Brazil, which was the most recent elections when Bolsonaro was elected. So just a very quick background about the political scenario in Brazil for people who are not familiar. We had military dictatorship for 21 years. We had the first direct elections to president in 1989. So it's a recent sort of democracy. We have a system that's presidential with elections every 4 years. A very, very large number of parties. If I'm not mistaken, last time it was counted, it's something like 40, many small parties. The Workers' Party, which is kind of a center-left party, was in power for 14 years, first with Lula and then for 2 terms, then Dilma. And she did 1 term and a half because she was impeached in 2016, accused of moving budget between doing some sort of irregular budget maneuvering. But many believe that it was a kind of a constitutional coup. And then Bolsonaro was elected in 2018 because he managed to gather a lot of support from influential actors in Brazil, like the military, evangelical churches, the economic elites, politicians with a neoliberal agenda. So this was the period when we conducted our study. And what this party did was that they sort of recruited 2 leaders from from social movements in Brazil. Guilherme Boulos, on my left, from the homeless workers movement, and Sonia Guajajara, who's from the indigenous people movement and was the first indigenous woman ever to run as a candidate for president in Brazil. And obviously, they did not win the elections, but they were somewhat successful in terms of generating a greater level of visibility for the party and also for the movement. So for all these interconnected actors here. So what did we do? We studied the sort of networks of recommended videos for 3 videos that we selected for each one of these channels. One was Guilherme Boulos himself. He has a very large number of followers. He's the leader of the homeless workers movement. So we selected 1 video from his channel. Then we selected 1 video from the indigenous movement channel. And we selected 1 video from the party's channel. And yes, so that's what we did. And we used YouTube data tools. And how did we choose this video? We did a search using the keywords Sonia Guajajara, so the leader, the woman, the female leader of the indigenous peoples movement. And we sorted these videos by relevance, by the relevance categories. So our chosen videos were, in a way, the three most relevant within these three channels. And why did we use Sonia Guajajara as the keyword? Because in this network, in a way, she was the kind of weakest link, because both Bolus and, had kind of a bigger visibility, had been more in the kind of media spotlight at the time. So the idea was to look at this related content and how that was being played out, by YouTube and the algorithmic logics of YouTube, to sort of investigate these alliances between the social movements and the parties. And as I said, we used the YouTube data tools. We downloaded a spreadsheet that allowed us to search some keywords. So, I'm just talking about this very, very quickly, but we found some things that were not surprising at all, and some things that were quite bizarre. Well, not surprisingly, YouTube's recommendation system, what YouTube was pushing to the videos when we did our search, and we did the search as a sort of anonymous viewer, someone who didn't have a Google account, was that the content that was being pushed was the content that already had a very high number of views. So just to give you an example, there was like a concert of Alicia Keys with Sonia Guajajara and Rock in Rio, which is a big rock music festival in Brazil. So, with this kind of celebrity element. Also, there's a very popular cartoon in Brazil called Lotti Dotti Chicken that is very popular with children. That was also sort of being pushed. Only 8% of the videos in the indigenous movements network of related videos actually contain the word indigenous in Portuguese, índio or indígena, which is very bizarre given that this is the indigenous people movement. For Bolus, the homeless workers leader, there were lots of videos that were actually uploaded by right-wing groups that were actually, political opponents, not to mention videos with racist remarks against indigenous people, for example, that were being assembled in the recommended playlist by YouTube. So what were some of the lessons? Again, very quickly. Well, an obvious one is that this fact that the political audiovisual material by progressive, parties and social movements is being mediated, organized, presented by YouTube and commercial platforms is not helpful for social movements in many ways. But, this strategy that they had of the party connecting with social movements actually somewhat worked in terms of visibility, and we can talk a little bit more about that during the discussion. And so, but at the same time, these connections that they were having in the offline world, were not necessarily being strengthened in the online environments, as we could see when we analyzed the network of related videos. So this is a really quick summary. Here's my email, social media information, contact, and I'm really looking forward to exchanging ideas with you, how we can learn from each other in terms of overcoming these barriers that content management by commercial platforms and internet giants can impose. So yes, so these some posts that we had in, by social movements and by Witness Brazil in Portuguese about the, killing of Shireen, and South to South solidarity, and Palestinian Lives Matter. Let's spread the Palestinian narratives. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I will. That's really very insightful, and I will come back to the South-South collaboration and solidarity at a later stage. But you offered really many important takes and really many inspiring examples. And this is an invitation to the audience who are with us. Please do not hesitate to share your questions. I will be collecting them and asking them. And I will come back to Dea and Andrea after Nadim presentations now. So Nadim, the screen is yours. We're moving to you to take us to another experience on how content management on social media platforms impact solidarity with the Palestinians based on your experience. And thank you very much once again for your leadership, and to Hamle for bringing us all together and have this conversation. Over to you.
Thank you, Ala. Happy to be with you and with Dia and Andrea. I wanted to speak a little bit about, to try to maybe to portray the picture for the audience about the issue of how the Palestinian voices are being silenced. So we are talking about reality where, for example, a propaganda video in the time of the Israeli aggression on Gaza Strip the last year, a propaganda video that was posted by the Israeli government on YouTube was running for months, including fake news, including propaganda, including incitement, and it basically went untouched. While, for example, a video that contained information about violations of Palestinians on YouTube was taken down and not allowed to be watched. The same video basically uploaded again to the same platform, to YouTube, from France, was allowed and continued to be running. So this is similar also to what Dia already mentioned, like how you are being treated on the platform depends a lot from where you are coming, which country you are in. Again, how these platforms are not being equal to all, how they are very much Eurocentric, American-centric, or let's say Western-centric in assuming that there is more legitimacy to somebody, even if it's the same content. So somebody sitting in Europe is allowed to say that, somebody sitting in the Middle East is not. Focusing or zooming in back to Palestine, I mean, clearly we learned a lot from the experience of Sheikh Jarrah last year and how the content was dealt with. It gave a very clear demonstration how these companies are looking to the Palestinian content. At the same time, where we, the Palestinians, are trying basically to speak about the violation of our human rights and to show it to the world and to mobilize and to create a movement of solidarity by raising the awareness of the people around this, the platforms are working against that. The platforms are adopting the understanding, the Israeli point of view, the Israeli definition of what's incitement, what's legitimate. And then in many cases, they were saying there's no exception for occupation. Even if you are occupied, you're not allowed to say. But here now we see again with the Ukrainian-Russian case that there are exceptions. And if the country that is occupied is part of Europe or at the gates of Europe, suddenly everything changed and the equation is not as we used to know. I have to say that in the same time that the Palestinian content was being taken down and pushed away and silenced, in the same time, all the Israeli propaganda, again, on Facebook, similar as in YouTube, was there, was not deleted, was not taken. There is under moderation, if any kind of moderation to Hebrew content that comes to incite against Palestinians and Arab. Hamle has been doing many researches annually, indexes, about how big the phenomenon, and especially in that time, in the time of the Sheikh Jarrah uprising and last May, the issue was very, very clear. Again, there is no hate speech lexicon in Hebrew, while there is a very extensive, long one with so many keywords in Arabic. They don't have any, except like two names. There is no any designation for Israeli organizations. When we were asking them about and what about the groups who are running around in the settlements in the West Bank and doing actual violence? They are coordinating attacks. They were saying us, if you know about any names, let us know. Like why the Palestinians should go and do a research that you're supposed to do as you did about Palestinians. So in the case of Israelis, Palestinians have to give them the names because they don't have the budgets apparently to do a proper research about the organizations. I mean, I think also going back, I mean, we need also to understand the depth of the connection. There is a deep connections between the Israeli government and the political level and with the high executives. There have been many meetings, lots of coordination, especially at the level of Ministry of Justice and the Cyber Unit. But also we have to understand that the technological connection, because even if the technological connection is not political, but in many ways it is, because there are many people who are interacting with the company at the highest levels, the technological levels, and influencing, even if it's in a kind of quiet, silent way. And lastly, there is the money. I mean, Israel is a market, it's a good market for Meta, more than 300 million in annual ads. So obviously there's lots of interest in this market and lots of will to operate. And again, oppressive regime and a company that is seeking for profit, not really good results. Also here in our context, but also in other contexts. I think also it's important to see that there is lots of systematic work that is happening from the Israeli government side. So it includes, I mean, obviously the company itself, as was mentioned, there's the keywords, there's the designation list, all of this, the artificial intelligence that's systematically making the takedowns automatically. But also there is the applications that's coming from the cyber unit. I mean, we are talking about I mean, we had the statistics in the last recent events, the last 2 months. In few weeks, there was more than 5,000 requests for takedowns. And we are talking about like 3 weeks, which is like a huge amount of requests for takedowns. And apparently, according to the Israeli Cyber Unit, 87% of them were answered positively. So the vast majority is almost automatically being taken down. So obviously this is very problematic, but I think also we have to take into account that there is online brigading. I mean, the Israeli side is doing lots of organizing of public around reporting and misusing the reporting, because when you are asking for tens of thousands of people to report one piece of content, right? Even that you don't know what the content is about, because most probably you don't know Arabic, you know what's written about, because just somebody told you, like, go there and report it. So this is also manipulation of the system. And we have to see in the bigger picture, you have one side that is very, understand the system in a very good way, has the manpower, the money, the resources to do all these kind of actions of manipulations, the pressure. And you have the other side, which unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know how you see it, but it's not organized. I mean, not organized in a way of online brigading for sure. There's almost nothing like this. There is not a good connection in terms of having like this strategic connection between the Palestinian government and Meta, and the Palestinian government, in many ways, we have also our critics towards it. But again, they're not seeing us as in any way as a leverage or something. And this is maybe the next point, like how we move from the situation we are in into a situation that we can advocate better and get results. And as Dia said, many of us has been advocating for many years, and we hardly see anything changing. Maybe some bits and here and there, but not really something that is substantial and not something to the core, but rather, appealing about this account and that page. But I mean, obviously, what we want to see is a change in the policy and not in specific cases.
Thank you very much, Nadim. And these statistics that you gave are really important and very informative, but also they illustrate the problem and they illustrate the issue. So thank you for sharing that with us. I would like to go back and connect these three different interventions and go back to Dia. And, like thinking if the content, or basically put it, the question, can content moderation practices here really be improved within the current state of social media platforms and their business models and the incentives they offer? So if we put ourselves on the other side about the modality of these social media platforms, what can we do? Like, can these practices be improved? I know this is a big question, but it is a question that is really in our faces based on your discussion.
Yeah, and it's an important question because a lot of us spend a lot of time on this, and it's and a lot of energy, and so I think that there's a few different answers. The first thing I'll say is that the harm that is caused by their policies, by their business models, and by their practices, we can reduce the harm. We can, here and there, we definitely have small changes that they make that do improve the situation. Usually it's very much a Band-Aid though. And a Band-Aid doesn't mean it's not doing anything, I mean, a Band-Aid still is important when you have a huge wound, you have to cover it, you have to bandage it up, but it doesn't fix the underlying problem. And that is very much what we are doing. When we are advocating, and I think I said, I'll say a little bit about how advocacy on this topic looks. One of the most important things is media pressure. And we've gotten much more media attention in the last several years than we did before. And it means that platforms will talk to us. The reality is they're not even going to have a conversation with civil society if they haven't gotten pressure. And I know that oftentimes, Meta has this attitude of, oh, it's unfair. You're always focusing on us and all these other platforms are doing terrible things. And they're not wrong that actually YouTube deserves as much attention as Meta. I mean, YouTube has so many problems. Twitter also is not perfect. TikTok increasingly deserves attention. Telegram now is a huge problem for human rights related content. All of the platforms deserve attention. However, the fact is that you are talking to us and you even have that because you made mistakes and because there are people at your company who speak out about them. And because as activists, we see the harm that is caused on the platform. So media pressure is incredibly important. Talking directly to companies is important. Again, it sometimes feels like, okay, you're talking to them, you're hearing the same thing that you heard 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but it's not always the same. It's a little bit different. And that is very frustrating because it's only a little bit, but it's still not nothing. Also, something that I've used a lot is open letters, where you get together a group, you sign on to something pointing out the problems. And these are important because it's actually not so much always exactly about every specific detail in the letter. It's about the process of coming together, working on it, talking to the other people who have related issues, and realizing that we do need solidarity. And one of the things that platforms don't get away with anymore, and this is something that has changed, and I think we should be proud as civil society, is that they used to tell different people in different parts of the world different things when they would complain about problems. Or they would say, well, we have to do this because this other civil society told us that this is a problem. They have a much harder time doing that now because we're all talking to each other. And I feel like every year there's some new initiative where people are sharing information with each other and saying, oh, this is what I understand about the platform. Okay, this is what I understand. So we understand the problem better than we used to, and we understand the small things we can do to address the problem. The other thing that I think is a newer tactic that I'm really interested in pursuing more, because Mnemonic is based in Berlin. And so we do have access to these conversations that are happening in the European Union. And for anybody, this is not what this panel is about, but for anybody who pays attention to European Union legislation, first of all, it has a huge global impact. The GDPR had a big global impact. So did this German law, NetzDG. Companies directly copied it. Or not, sorry, companies, oppressive governments directly copied it. And so it has a huge impact. And European legislators don't want to hear about how they're impacting the rest of the world. They want to pretend that they're leaders of democracy, helping to spread their wonderful European ideals around the world, but they don't want to hear about the global impact. But civil society is going to force them to listen. They have to understand it. They have to care, especially because there's all these multi-stakeholder forums where they're participating in, they're talking to other people. So, things like the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, or we just saw this declaration about the future of the internet that came from the US. So, there is a way that diaspora organizations can do direct advocacy where they are. And so I actually would really strongly call on Arabic-speaking people or people of Palestinian descent who are, and all Arabic-speaking, if you're in the United States, you have a special opportunity to bring attention to the rest of the world and how legislation that's happening in the US is also impacting the rest of the world, and how these US companies are impacting the rest of the world. I think one of the most impactful things I've ever seen was a physical protest in front of the Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park. This was actually how I got my start talking to companies, was a big physical protest of drag queens and trans people who were protesting Facebook's policy. And it got very big media attention, and they did change their policy. Even now, I would say that I feel like that change was a success. So we really need global solidarity. We need people like me who have access to European legislators and international NGOs to push and say, please make it global. Think about the rest of the world. And I think that we're seeing things change, even in the sort of NGO landscape. We're seeing things change. So I feel like there's some positive movement there. All of that being said, we do constantly need to be thinking about what we do if we can't access these platforms, or if someone is kicked off of the platforms. What are the alternatives, and how do we remain in communication with each other?
Many thanks for these concrete ideas. And I want to connect the mention of YouTube with what Andrea was mentioning earlier. But also, this is an invitation to the audience that they can also ask their questions in Arabic, as you mentioned it. So English, Arabic, please ask your questions in the language you like. But going back to YouTube here and sticking to the example of Brazil that you were talking about, Andrea, I'm curious more about the kind of strategies that the social movements in Brazil deployed, in the sense that you mentioned that or YouTube recommendation system was pushing content of political opponents that contains hate speech against the social movements, and the content was also racist. So from the perspective of Brazilian social movement, what kind of strategies have been deployed to deal with this that others from the Global South can also learn from? I have another question for you, but I think this is a big enough question to deal with.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, it's also an important question, a difficult one. I think that there isn't really a straightforward answer, but there are different things that have been tried out, and there are different perspectives on this issue. One is this idea of perhaps link visibility. So, you have different actors in positions of visibility, linking up to each other in solidarity, in defense, when things like that happen. So, for example, now there is a leader of an indigenous community being attacked with fake news in the Brazilian sort of social media sphere. And so all the civil society organizations, celebrities, influencers, people, politicians, so this network of supporters and allies really posting about that issue and bringing about and really connecting to each other. And we've seen that happening, for example, with Black women who are politicians in Brazil, with social movements. So this network that's been created, and people start posting together and coordinating this kind of joint response and in defense of protection, sometimes when they're being attacked, or when there's racist attacks happening. So this kind of link visibility could be a strategy that could work in some ways. But there's also a bit of, some other people believe that sometimes the opponents, they kind of tag along to gain popularity. So when they see that, for example, a particular social movement or, is gaining attention, they tag along on that content with something that's totally, politically opposing that. So some people believe that maybe it's better to block them and ignore them completely, so that's another kind of approach to it. So we could debate, which one works better. There've been like different perspectives on this. And the other really is legal protection, seek legal protection. And that's happened. And in some ways in Brazil, there has been some small success stories, with the courts, going to court and stuff like that. One example was when Marielle Franco was a Black woman, a city councilor in Rio, was murdered in 2018. And after her murder, also her reputation was being murdered with spreading of false photographs of her. And actually, organizations and lawyers, they managed to sort of take down the content and take it to court. And at least, it was very difficult to sort of hold people accountable for spreading these images, but at least they were sort of successful in terms of really mobilizing and preventing that content from being spread further. So these are kind of some things that can be done, but there isn't really a right or wrong answer, but there are different things that have been tried that have worked to some extent. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, and Andrea, here there is a question from Rima that also linked to another question that I have. But Rima asks, what are some, if any, of the existing South-South content moderation working groups, communities, folks can join, and how? So if you're aware of this, and we leave it there, and I come back to the other questions that I have for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I heard the question in the previous panel, and I was thinking about that. I am unaware of, in terms of content moderation, a South-to-South alliance explicitly that I know of. I don't know if Dia or Nadim or other members of the panel know. I mean, I've taken part in some South-to-South experiences in terms of activism and artivism. So producing kind of joint content, particularly artivism, so artistic activism. So activists in Brazil, in Kenya, producing artistic content about a social issue in Brazil, and this kind of dialogues taking place. But in terms of the content moderation, content management, concrete initiatives, I am not aware. I think it's really important. We should think about that and work on that, because I think it could be really, really interesting and maybe really powerful. But I know more about the kind of activist side of things, not so much about content management initiatives and moderation.
Dia, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just to mention two specific initiatives. One, which is not specific South-South solidarity, but it is global, and it is the initiative where I will say I've put a lot of effort, and other people on this mailing list have put a lot of effort into bringing in people from US and EU organizations who want to listen and want to learn and want to understand how their work impacts people who are outside of those places. So I co-run a mailing list with Jillian York from the Electronic Frontier Foundation that's all about content moderation issues. And I think at this point, it's probably about evenly split in terms of sort of, global North and quote, global South people. So everybody's welcome to join that. My email is very easy. It's dia@mnemonic.org. So you can reach out to me if you would like to join the list. And you don't have to be, please don't think you can't join because you're not a content moderation expert. If you've seen content get improperly taken down, or if you've had your own content get taken down, you are a content moderation expert, and we want you on the list. The other thing is there is a group called the Next Billion Network. They're not, I don't think that they're growing right now. But they have done some global research that is specifically looking at comparisons of like content moderated in Arabic, in Arabic-speaking places in India, in Southeast Asia, and in Sub-Saharan Africa. And so I'm not sure if people are interested in that. You can reach out to me. I actually need to get a status update. I think just the last thing I'll say, one of the difficulties is that if you are outside of the US and Western Europe, you're probably working under a much more difficult situation, and you might not have as much time to attend all these calls and talk to people and meet people. You might have visa difficulties that make it harder to go to a conference and meet people in person. You're probably underfunded because funders still don't understand how to fund in a way that actually really directs money to impact the communities. So there's a lot of challenges, and I'll just say there are people like me who are trying to push this sort of digital rights space to address these challenges. But again, if you're listening to this panel and you work at a global organization, or you're white presenting, or you have great English, just think about the ways that you can use those privileges to help to change this situation.
Thanks, Dea. We have 8 minutes left. I know time is running so fast, but I have 2 questions, one for Andrea and one for Nadim, and we have a couple of other questions. Andrea, I want to go back to your idea or the tension between visibility and vulnerability, because when you're more visible, you're more vulnerable in many ways. For example, you become when you're more visible, you become more likely to be attacked online with hate speech and other matters. So, considering all these dynamics that we talked about, how can we balance these elements between visibility and vulnerability in a way that matters to our collective work, that goes in our favor, advancing social causes for oppressed people, especially in the global South? So how can we reconcile this tension between visibility and vulnerability?
Thank you so much. Yes, again, a challenging question, but absolutely, visibility is a double-edged sword. I mean, we were in the previous panel, again, talking about the issue of Kashmir and how important visibility is. No one even hears or sees, or, so visibility is really, really key. And it's really the starting point. But then what happens after visibility? That's also another very complicated issue. And in Brazilian cases, we have seen quite a few examples of activist groups who have actually managed to reach some visibility. For example, in the favelas, the movements against police brutality, lots of groups on Facebook, very active on social media, who have managed to attract, some attention to the cause. But then, they were attacked, even with fake pages, again, destruction of reputation, surveillance, all kind of things. And I think I would connect back to some of the things that Dia was saying earlier about the media coverage, that, paradoxically, you reach that visibility stage that we have also studied in relation to different movements that we and activist groups that we observed and worked with in Brazil, that they reach visibility and that they have a kind of a critical moment with the visibility. And in some instances, the way that they overcame that was, again, reaching out to traditional media, for example, which is quite paradoxical, because in the Brazilian context, and I think it applies to other parts of the world, sometimes mainstream media is not very sympathetic and supportive towards a lot of social movements and activists. But sometimes these connections do work. And so we had a case, for example, of a favela group, that they reached out because they had connections. They were working in community media. So they had connections with mainstream media, for example, with a broadcast TV in Brazil, the Record TV, that have a very popular show on lunchtime. And then they ran a story to kind of counter a rumor that was going on about that particular activist group. And that kind of helped them overcome their crisis. So again, this connection of the media coverage, the pressure, the connection with influential actors on the social media sphere, are some of the things that could work against this vulnerability that's brought by visibility. But then again, other critical moments might unfold, and it's not an easy formula. It's a very tricky situation sometimes.
Thanks a lot, Andrea. Nadim, I would like to move to you with another, connecting with what you hinted to earlier on related to Ukraine and Russia. And so, of course, we cannot dismiss all the double standards and hypocrisy that many already covered. But do you think that what is happening in Ukraine now could be a turning point on how social media and tech companies are dealing with the Palestinian content and other global South content? And if so, why?
Yes, I mean, I think it is in a way, it could be at least potentially a turning point, because it's showing in a very clear way that there are double standards. It's showing in a clear way how things are legitimate to one side and not legitimate to another side. It's showing also how much these companies are very Western-centric and operating in the mentality of that we, the people and the governments in the West, have more rights, more legitimacy to do things. Even things that are negative, we have much more legitimacy to do them, and to a certain extent, they are being legitimized only because we do them. But when another person who's from the global South is doing them, then it's problematic and should not be, and we should educate them, etc. So obviously it's a very problematic. It showed things in a very clear way, things that we have been saying, but maybe we find it difficult to prove and to show in a clear way to the public. So I think this moment should be used by global South organizations who are dealing like us with content moderation to create coalition, to create more intersectional work in order to create leverage on the companies. Because the point that I wanted to say also that we learned something from the uprising last year. If you have at certain point, certain momentum where there is lots of stakeholders who are coming together and together pressuring the company in the end would at least feel obliged to do something. Maybe not to change the policy immediately, but at least like what happened, that they did accept the call to have examination of the content moderation of Arabic, and they did commission the third party, which is something not obvious and not understandable. But I think only because they reached a point that they had local pressure, they had influential pressures, politicians, media, like classical media writing about it and telling the story, organizations, we said, people who are not from Palestine but from the rest of the global South, actors from the Arabic region. So all in all, created enough pressure on the company that the company agreed and said, yes, maybe we need to check this and that. Now, obviously, they may use it again as some kind of committee, to relieve the pain and to put down the pressure and, not to use even the recommendation later on. But at least it showed us that this is possible if there is enough coalition, if there is enough coordination. If we are working together from Palestine, from the Arabic region, internationally, global South, we can reach a point where we have a leverage on the companies, and from there, maybe the policy could be changing.
Thanks a lot for this. You answered by one of the questions raised by the audience. If this tool, if adding pressure on these companies, writing them is effective or not. So I hear from all of you that we should keep the course and continue with that, because that they need to feel the pressure from all these different actors. We're running out of time, but I would like to give all of you 30 seconds to share with us the message that you would like the audience to leave with. In 30 seconds, what is your main message in this domain? I know it's a hard task, but I would like the audience to take something from you and run with it. Andrea.
What I was thinking today, before I came to the panel, is that all these issues are so challenging, and I think sometimes it's really easy to lose hope and just think these are, hopeless. Can we really bring about change? But I think after hearing, all of you, I think the message I have is that we have to keep insisting, we have to keep working together. And yes, I'm a strong believer in South-to-South solidarity. So yes, I think that's my message. Let's keep believing in it and let's keep working together. And I learned already so much from you. And thanks, Dina, for sharing the initiative. So I think things like that is what we have to keep doing, small things that maybe can bring some change. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm really happy and honored to be here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sometimes in this work, I just wonder if, I have another meeting with Facebook and I'm like, why am I doing this? But the fact is that what is happening on the internet is hand in hand with the so-called real world. It is real. And so we can't stop fighting. So even if it feels frustrating, we have to keep fighting. That's what you do in this world when things are unfair, when people's lives are on the line, when people's freedom is on the line. And so just keep fighting, look to each other for support, and don't be afraid to have hard conversations. That's the last thing I'll say.
Great. Nadim.
So in the same line, yeah, to keep the struggle going on, everybody has a role, even if you're not part of an organization as an individual, you can document cases, send them to us, to Hamle. We have our platform, we document, we keep the advocacy, and I think us as organizations and as activists, we have to also coordinate, work together, create the leverage, and keep the pressure. I mean, I know that this is, again, as mentioned, it's very frustrating because we are dealing with very influential and strong companies that are, in many ways, they are stronger than governments and wealthier than many governments, but still we have to move on and keep the pressure until we see the change, and I think the change will come eventually.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all these inspiring concluding remarks. If you re-listen and re-watch this panel, there are 3 words and 3 phrases were repeated. Obviously, content management and content moderation. But the 3rd word that all of you repeated a couple of times was together. And this is really the togetherness is really the important message that also I would like to leave everyone with, because together we are definitely better, and together we can go further. And really, it is this togetherness that we need to keep insisting on having in all what we do, including in this domain. With that, we exhausted our time. Thank you so much, dear speakers, dear audience. This was fascinating. I would like to continue this conversation for longer, but I hope we offered our audience lots of entry points to deal with and lots of action to take all together to go further. Thank you so much, Leah, Andrea, Nadim, and thank you, Hamle, for organizing this, and thank you for everyone who joined us.